Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Needy No More, the podcast dedicated to healing the anxious attachment style. I'm your host, anxious attachment style coach and author, Chris Ratcliffe. I've helped thousands of people across 6 continents to end the cycle of anxious attachment through my books, workshops, digital downloads, and coaching program. I'm excited to carry on that mission here on the podcast, sharing tools and techniques, principles and practices for you to explore on your journey to growing more secure. Welcome back, everyone. I have a confession to make. I have claimed for years that I have been vulnerable in my content, and I stand by that. But I think a lot of that vulnerability has been behind the written word, so to speak, in blog posts and in books, in ways that have been easy for me to perfect. And in the spirit of being more vulnerable and more transparent and showing more of my own humanness and messiness, I want to talk about the 3 biggest relationships that broke my heart, that broke me open in various ways and taught me lessons in some ways I needed to learn in order to grow more secure. Before I get into them, I want to be clear that this isn't about dragging anyone. So in the spirit of that, I'm going to be changing the names of these individuals. This is not about me harping on the past or trying to make anyone look a certain way. This is solely my perspective on my experience in these relationships, and more importantly, what it taught me about myself. So buckle up, because I'm going to be spilling a lot of tea today. I'm going to be getting real about some of my biggest heartbreaks, and I'm going to be doing it in real time, off the cuff, with you here on the show. The very first relationship I want to unpack is also my longest one. Let's say it was with a guy named Brian. Now, Brian and I met at a very interesting time in my life. I had just finished a 6-month cleanse, if you will, of dating and hooking up. Prior to this, I had gone on a lot of dates. I was living in New York City at the time. I was working in the magazine industry. I was going out a lot. I was meeting a lot of people, and I was going on many dates, but none of them ever led to a relationship. So after a few years in the city of doing this, I decided, you know what? It's time for me to take a breather. I'm the common denominator in all of my experiences, and I just need a reset. Like, I don't want to be hooking up with anyone. I don't want to be going on any dates. I don't want to be on any dating apps. So I deleted the apps. I didn't go on any dates. I completely abstained from any kind of physical intimacy with anyone for 6 months. And that was the predetermined time frame that I came up with. So I completed that challenge, and I was feeling refreshed in a lot of ways. I felt reinvigorated. I felt more myself than I ever had before. And I think a lot of that had to do with learning to set boundaries with myself, learning to take better care of myself. So that's what the 6 months provided to me. And coming off of that, I felt like I was on top of the world. I didn't need anyone. I felt very self-assured. My self-confidence was really high. And just a week later, less than a week actually, I was in Baltimore visiting a friend at the time, and we decided to go out to one of the gay bars. And we weren't there very long before I locked eyes with Brian across the bar. I thought he was very attractive. I was not intimidated by him, but just kind of doing my own thing. And I made eyes with him a couple of times, trying to indicate like, hey, come over and talk to me. Like, I think you're interesting. And eventually he did. So he comes over, we strike up a conversation. It's very playful. It's very easy. Things are flowing. The drinks are flowing. The conversation's flowing. And then his boyfriend walks over. And he is not happy, understandably. And I don't want to ruffle any feathers. I don't want to be in any drama. So I just say to his boyfriend, look, I did not mean to cause any issues here or any trouble. I did not know that he had a boyfriend, so I just want to apologize and wish you both well. That night in the car on the way home, I felt a certain kind of way. I don't know. I felt excited about meeting someone. I felt in some ways maybe a sense of loss, I suppose, at not being able to pursue anything further with this person when I very clearly felt a spark, a connection. We had a lot in common. And I was sharing as much with my friend and nothing came of it, but it just was kind of like a moment where I was thinking to myself, this is really frustrating. Like, I met someone I like and it's not going to go anywhere. Flash forward to the next night. My friend wants to go back to the same bar. So we go. I run into Brian again. He comes up to me again. And I say, really? Are we going to do this again? Like, we've been down this road. I know that you're taken. And he's like, no, but we can still talk platonically, like as friends. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't think your boyfriend would like that very much. This seems maybe a bit disrespectful to him. And his boyfriend came over again. And I threw my hands up in defense and was just like, hey, I have been trying to keep to myself. And I pulled 2 business cards out of my wallet and I handed one to each of them. And I just said, I wish you both nothing but the best. Keep in touch. Take care. And I removed myself from the situation. Because we had already had this conversation, so I just felt like this is too much deja vu, like 2 nights in a row, whatever. So we leave eventually at the end of the night, and, I don't really think very much of it anymore. I'm just kind of like, okay, this guy's probably a player, whatever. And then a few months go by, and I get a random Facebook message from someone. And remember, I didn't exchange contact information with Brian at all. I gave my business card, it had my cell phone on it. He chose not to message me on my cell and instead messaged me on Facebook. So I'm seeing a name and a profile image that, I'm not really connecting the dots at first, right? Like, I don't really recognize who this person is. Then we start chatting and I realize it's that guy, Brian, from the bar. Long story short, there's a lot more to the story, but I'm going to fast forward a little bit here. He eventually comes to visit after a lot of conversations back and forth. I want to say we probably spoke for maybe a week and a half, 2 weeks. He decides to drive up to New York from Baltimore because remember, I met him when I was visiting Baltimore and he happened to live there. So he comes up, we have a wonderful weekend. At the end of the weekend, we share a very intimate moment where we're looking in each other's eyes and he asks me, are you scared of the physical distance between us? And I said, no. Are you? And he said, yeah, I think I might be. And I said, well, it's not that I'm not scared, but I think there's something here worth exploring and we can figure out the logistics. And he said, okay, why don't you come down to Baltimore next weekend? So I did. And we had a wonderful time there, went out with his friends, and things just felt so easy. Well, we got into a rhythm of seeing one another. We had a pattern that we agreed upon where we fell into a rhythm of one weekend of him coming to me, one weekend of me going to him, one weekend off so that we could kind of live our lives, do whatever we wanted to do, hang out with friends, like whatever, travel, go on trips, who cares? Like just a weekend to ourselves that didn't involve, the long distance relationship component. So it was a pretty good cycle. I mean, I was seeing him most weekends and we were talking on the phone every night for hours. So I felt very connected to this person and our intimacy deepened pretty quickly. But one of the factors that really played into the downfall of the relationship, I think, was the fact that he was not out to his family. And flash forward a couple of months, I eventually meet his family. He decides that, we're in a good place. He, wants me to meet his mom, his sister, his nieces. Like, we're at the point where we're ready to deepen the kind of integration in one another's lives. And I felt very flattered, quite frankly, that I'm the first person that he wanted to bring home. So I meet his family and things are going really, really, really well. We spend Valentine's Day together. At this point, we've been together for months. And then the next month, I go to South by Southwest for work. At the time, I was working for a small marketing agency, and I was also exploring a new job opportunity with a magazine, with Entertainment Weekly. And I got the call from Entertainment Weekly while I was in Austin for South by Southwest. that I got the job, and it was one of the biggest moments in my career. And I called him, and he was very dismissive. Like, yeah, that's great. I gotta go. Like, I'll call you later. Very much not celebratory, not like, oh my God, that's amazing. Like, I gotta run, but let me call you back in like an hour. It was very non-committal, very, again, dismissive. And it left a really sour taste in my mouth. Like, I felt like, damn, I mean, I'm experiencing some incredible career news, and you rushed me off the phone. You're the very first person I called. And this was on top of already sensing some distance. And I know the anxious attachers watching and listening can feel that very deeply. You know the distance I'm talking about. The taking longer to respond, the not sending as many pictures, the lack of emojis, the lack of questions, the lack of interest in my trip and what I was doing, and just lack of an expression of consideration and thoughtfulness or care, really. And so I knew something was up, but I had a lot of stuff that I had to figure out. My company that I was working for was trying to send me back to New York earlier than anticipated, but there were no flights out. I was supposed to fly back to Baltimore, and we were flying up to Vermont to go on a ski trip, which I'll talk about in a moment. But I had to fly back to New York instead of Baltimore. I ended up having to take the train down the next day, so quick turnaround in order to make a flight out the following morning, which was already booked to go to Stowe for a ski trip. And so I get to Baltimore, and we have dinner, and things seem fine. Like, everything's normal again. But he passes out on the couch after dinner, which he was prone to do. And being the thoughtful, considerate partner that I was and do consider myself to be, I was preparing for the next morning. We had to get up early, drive to DC for our flight, whatever. So I plug in his iPad because I know he's going to want to use it on the plane, and it's on low battery. Well, I see all these notifications pop up from various location-based gay apps, if you get my drift, and my stomach immediately sinks. And I knew his password. We shared these things with one another. So I looked. I read every single message, and it was deeply disturbing. There were explicit photographs that were shared, location shared, and while I couldn't put a finger on or trace any kind of in-person interactions, if you understand what I'm saying, I was still very shook by this, like literally shaking. My nervous system was on maximum high alert, and I considered, what am I going to do with this? So I just took the iPad, I brought it downstairs, and I dropped it on the couch and woke him up and was like, hey, you've got 60 seconds to explain what exactly is going on here, because I'm very confused. We're in a monogamous relationship. We've been dating for months. And I just found all of these messages of you talking to other men and sending explicit photographs back and forth and potentially meeting. And I am met with nothing but dismissiveness, nothing but deflection, no apology, no accountability. And things got so heated that I decided to press pause and go for a walk and come back. When I get back, nothing. And at this point, it's getting late. We have to be up at 5 a.m. It's like 11 o'clock at night. And we were flying to Vermont to meet up with two of my closest friends who were staying with us there, who have already booked travel and whatnot. At this point, I would have canceled the trip, like no questions asked. It didn't make sense to go on the trip. But at the time, my people-pleasing tendencies kicked in, and I thought to myself, well, I have to go on the trip. I can't do this to my friends. Like, while the timing isn't ideal, we can revisit this conversation later. That was my first mistake. Then we go on the trip. A bunch of things happen that really frustrate me. One of them being Brian had promised to pay for ski lessons for me, and we get there, and he's like, I don't know what you're talking about. There were all of these red flags that continually kept popping up. And we get back after the trip and still no apology. Nothing has changed. And the distance between us had started growing, but I couldn't bring it up because I didn't want to be met with dismissive energy once more or defensiveness. So I thought to myself, you know what? Let's just press pause on this and revisit it later. I get back to New York. Weeks go by, we're going back and forth seeing one another, and nothing changes. And at some point, I just sweep it under the rug and decide to say, you know what? I love this person. I want to be with them. Let's just chalk it up to it being a one-off thing. Things continue getting worse in the connection. Over time, the communication is dropping off. We're still seeing one another, but his behavior is starting to become more and more erratic. I'm starting to hear from him when we're out drinking in either New York or Baltimore and with either of our friend groups, like, I don't know, I should just be single, maybe I should just go through a phase where I hook up with a lot of people. I just came out, blah, blah, blah. A lot of rationalizing of him pulling away. Now, I know now, based on the work that I've done on myself and the healing work that I've done and now do with clients all over, that these were deactivating strategies. He was clearly exhibiting avoidant tendencies. And in the true fashion of an anxious attacher, I latched on harder, he pulled away more, and we just spiraled downward over the course of many, many months. Flash forward to celebrating our 1-year anniversary in New York. We have a wonderful dinner. We go to a party that one of my friends is throwing, and then we go bar hopping. And we end up running into some of my very closest friends who I haven't seen in a couple of weeks because I've been traveling. And he wants to go home. I want to stay. So I give him the keys to my place and I say, just go. It's fine. I'll be right behind you. I'm probably like a half hour behind you. I get back to my apartment. He's packed up his things. He's leaving in the middle of the night at like 3 a.m. No explanation. It's over, Chris. I can't do this. And that was that. Weeks go by. We don't see one another. We're not talking. I was left in shambles. Eventually, I receive a card in the mail from him that essentially says, never change who you are. I loved you very deeply. I still love you. I always knew that when you entered my life, you'd make me a better man, and you've done that, and never forget the role that you've had in my life. It was a beautiful card to receive, but it was also very, very confusing because at the time I wanted nothing more than to get him back. As sad as that is to admit, that's what I wanted. I wanted him back. I missed him deeply. I couldn't focus at work. I was having trouble sleeping. Like, I was a shell of myself at the time, which many of us as anxious attachers who have been through devastating breakups before have felt that low. It is a low. It's terrible. I mean, in a lot of ways, it's a form of withdrawal, and I've talked about that on the show previously. A few more months go by. I find myself back in Baltimore visiting the same friend that I was with when I met Brian. And long story short, there's a blizzard that rolls through and I get stuck in Baltimore and I need a place to stay. Keep in mind, I was in my 20s. I didn't have a large income. I didn't have a large budget to pay for a hotel. So I hit up Brian. He comes and picks me up. He lets me stay with him. We kind of fall right back into it, right? Which is predictable, and I should have known. And on some level, I think I probably played things this way in order to make this reunion happen. Well, I keep getting stuck. My trains keep getting canceled. I'm there for days. And while I'm working remotely and, again, kind of falling right back into it, staying in his townhome, one night we all go out. By we all, I mean me and his friends. I see him flirting with someone. I decide to leave. He brings them back. There's an altercation verbally between all of us. Then he throws something at me, and that was it. That was it. Any kind of physical abuse is intolerable to me. So I had him drive me to the train station the next morning, and I just said, I wish we had never met. And that was the closure I suppose I needed. Now I know, of course, again, after years of working on myself in therapy and now being a coach myself, that I needed to give myself that closure. That final interaction months later didn't need to happen, and it was incredibly dramatic, and it only soured the relationship even more. But that's how it played out. I suppose Maya Angelou's quote applies here. When it comes to what I learned in this relationship, she famously wrote or said, when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. I didn't believe who he was showing me he was the first time, which is before we even entered a relationship, at that gay bar 2 nights in a row, disrespecting his boyfriend, on some level demonstrating infidelity or unfaithfulness to this person and with this person. And then, of course, the actual infidelity that occurred with him interacting explicitly with many other men and me looking the other way, which was a huge mistake, but a learning lesson for me. So when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. This was my biggest takeaway from this relationship. And by the way, this doesn't mean that Brian is a bad person. This means that we were not aligned in the ways that I needed. That if he wanted an open relationship, he could have discussed that with me and we could have approached that together. I could have had a choice in the matter. And I didn't. And he robbed me of that opportunity. And this is a lot of what happens when you have one insecure person approaching another insecure person, and their approaches make it worse. You end up spiraling down into insecurity. And that's what happened here. The second relationship that I want to talk about was a few years after the one with Brian. And this one was incredibly consequential for me. This was someone that I knew from college at the University of Miami. Let's call him Aaron. And Aaron and I were already pretty well acquainted. And while we were never close during my years in undergrad, we knew of each other. We ran in the same circles. We hung out a few times. Nothing ever came of it. I always thought he was intriguing. I always found him interesting. I was always attracted to him. But for whatever reason, he was preoccupied. I was preoccupied, as folks in their late teens and early 20s tend to be when they're in college, being pulled in a variety of different directions. But flash forward 10 years when we reconnect. Aaron happens to be in New York, and I wake up on a Saturday in July to a Facebook message, common theme, didn't even realize that, from this person saying, "Hey, I'm in New York." He lived in Chicago. "I'm here for a few days. Would love to connect if you're in town and you have the time." And I said, "Hey, actually, yeah, I am here. Why don't we all go out this evening?" Because I knew he was staying with another mutual friend of ours who also went to Miami. So we kind of assemble a group. We all go out. I'm at the bar with my friends before he shows up. And the second he walks in, we lock eyes. And I will never forget that kinetic energy between us, the smile that he gave to me from across the room. It was completely unexpected, especially because we weren't close. We never really interacted at a deep level. We had very surface level conversations. I suppose on social media over the years, we understand some big life milestone moments, whatever. That might have made us feel closer. I don't know. I don't know what this person's motive is when he walks into the bar. He comes up, gives me a huge hug. We start chatting, and we spend the rest of the night filling in the gap of 10 years since we had seen one another. He's sharing very vulnerably and intimately, and I'm sharing very vulnerably and intimately. And eventually we're making out. And the chemistry is very, very clear and kinetic. You can feel that spark, that pull, that magnetism that so many of us know very well. And we end up texting each other separately while we're both on the way home saying, "Let's spend the day together tomorrow, blah, blah, blah." We wake up, we do exactly that, and it's blissful. And eventually, at the end of the day, after all of the friends fall off throughout this Sunday fun day, we end up just the two of us back at my place. And you can guess what happened from there. Things got very intimate. The next morning was heavenly. He sent breakfast to my office, used the address from my business card to do this, sends me a text, "Hey, there's someone downstairs for you." And I'm like, "What? What do you mean?" And he's like, "At your office." So I go downstairs. He had sent me breakfast via Uber Eats, and I felt so special and so seen and so chosen. He flew back to Chicago that day, and it was tough, but we picked up over FaceTime and things were fine. Great. We spent hours talking to one another for weeks, and then my sister died, which threw a wrench into everything. Now, I'm not going to go down the path of explaining too much about what happened to my sister. I've written extensively about it, but she passed from an overdose. It was sudden, but she and I had been estranged for years. So it's not like I was devastated by this, but it did bring up a lot of unresolved trauma that I experienced with her. And it complicated things. And it eventually raised the question, do I tell Aaron about this? I mean, we're sharing everything with one another. And even though my friends, all of my close friends, advise me not to share this with him because it might be too much too soon, I do. I feel very close to him. Again, we've grown so intimate. We're having hours-long conversations a day with one another. It felt inauthentic to not share it. So I do, and he received it beautifully, was so supportive, invited me to come stay with him in Chicago, and a couple weeks later, I do. Now, I don't want to get into all the particulars of what happened in Chicago, but here's what I will say. He put me through the ringer. He was testing me left and right. And what I mean by that is he was living with his parents at the time. We're going out to dinner. Everything's great. He says, you know what, let's go to my parents' lake house. And I thought, wow, yeah, cool. A road trip sounds great. Like, let's do it. So he's like, yeah, my parents aren't going to be there. It's going to be great. We get there, and who's there? His parents. So I end up meeting his parents the second time only that I had ever done this, aside from Brian. Aaron was the second time. And this was not planned, and at least not on my part. And so it became very awkward very quickly. We ended up going to the fairgrounds and having a great night, and then coming back and getting into an argument about something very, very small that I had said that apparently triggered him, and he completely shut down, started reaching back out to his ex. By the way, he had just ended an engagement with someone and broken up with them like maybe 6 weeks before he had come to New York. So this was very recent, an obvious red flag that I had ignored. And in an act of incredible disrespect, he's messaging this person while I'm there, and I knew about it. The next day, we try to repair things. Things seem a little bit better. And then I have to fly back to New York. And to this day, that is the last time I ever saw him. After weeks of trying to regain the closeness that we once had and watching it fade away, I eventually pieced together that he had moved back in with his ex-fiance. And at that point, I couldn't take it anymore. And I was, again, devastated. You know, my colleagues noticed my energy, my excitement after connecting with him when he came to New York. And they also noticed the come down when I got back from Chicago and in the collapse of the connection in the weeks that followed. And it was actually my boss at the time who pulled me aside and said, Chris, what's going on at home? Because you're not yourself. Your energy is pulling everyone down in the office. Normally, you're bubbly, you're excitable, you're fun, you're creative, you have such a spark. And the absence of that is something we all feel. And I'm just concerned for you. And I'm so glad to this day that she brought that to my attention and brought it up because it needed to be said. And it was impacting my mental health, my ability to work, my ability to eat, to sleep, to function. This was a lower point than even I had been after my breakup with Brian, after spending a full year with him. And as a result of that conversation, I reached out to a therapist. I'm still seeing that therapist to this day. Catherine, if you ever see this, you're a godsend. But it was in my work with Catherine, in my very earliest sessions with her, that she identified my anxious attachment and recommended that I read Attached. I did. I digested it immediately. And that conversation, this series of events led me to where I am today, sitting in front of you, having coached thousands of people in various formats around the world on how to heal, and having had many former clients get engaged, leave harmful relationships, get married. And I have no regrets that this is how things played out. But this relationship taught me something very important, and as I mentioned, was incredibly consequential. And that's because it helped me identify my attachment style. I had a degree in psychology. I had studied through textbooks and various courses attachment, but I didn't piece together that the trauma that I had been through growing up and the abandonment in various ways from multiple family members had led to this adaptation relationally for me. And it was this connection, this spark, and the subsequent falling out with Aaron that led to that. And what a blessing that has become for me. So really, this is what I took away from that experience. One of the other things that I took away is to not ignore red flags. The fact that Aaron had just ended an engagement weeks before we reconnected should have given me pause, and it didn't. I looked the other way because how I felt with him felt more important than logically saying, I don't really think this person is ready for the kind of connection that I desire. He was showing me that he was. So I thought, you know what? Maybe it is over. Maybe I should give the benefit of the doubt. And I know a lot of people can relate to that who are watching and listening. So I just want to say, don't ignore the red flags. My friends were telling me, they were in my ears, they were in my head, they were texting me, they were telling me in person, like, hey, pump the brakes. We're really glad that you connect with this person, but this is all happening very, very quickly. And I did not listen. And those codependent tendencies would actually come to haunt me again in the third and final relationship that I want to talk about today. You know, they say that celebrity deaths come in threes, right? For me, my breakups, the death of my anxious attachment, and the birth of secure attachment in my life happened in three. And this third connection was with someone that I met almost immediately after moving to Charleston, South Carolina from New York. I had only been there for a couple of weeks. I only knew one person in Charleston, and that was my real estate agent who helped me buy my house. It just so happened that this person, my real estate agent, invited me out with some of his friends. And this person, whom we'll call Xander today, happened to be one of his friends, a mutual friend, someone that he knew. We all went out to karaoke, and honestly, I wasn't sure this person was even gay when I was talking to him. And my test question for this is always, who's your diva? And I'm talking about how much I love Mariah Carey, and his answer was Britney Spears, and I'm like, okay, I'm in safe territory here. We're both on the same team. We're good. So we shared numbers. It just so happened that the next day I was having a little get together. I had invited my real estate agent who had invited a bunch of other people, and I was inviting people left and right. I was looking to make friends, right? So I'm looking to network. I'm looking to branch out. So I have a bunch of people over to the house, and Xander and I hit it off tremendously to the point where other people there are kind of like, how long have you guys been dating? You know, that kind of vibe that other people are picking up on. We end up having a magical weekend. We start spending a lot of time together. Not usually during the week, but almost every minute of every weekend for weeks. Now, about a month into seeing one another, Xander invites me to go down with him from Charleston to a southern part of South Carolina, where his parents have a home. And I meet his family. So this is a common theme among all three. I met all of their families. And these are the only three men whose families I did meet. I hit it off with them. They're so sweet. Like, this person, Xander, and I are sharing a bedroom at his parents' house. Like, this is pretty clearly a signal that things are serious, right? That's how I interpreted it. And it just so happened that my dad had recently relocated to Charleston. I had moved him there. And so I introduced Xander to my father. And this was the first person I ever did introduce to my father. And because of what would happen a few months later, the only one. But Xander and I very quickly become an item. And then things start to shift after about a month and a half, maybe closer to 2 months. We're out celebrating his birthday. His friends are starting to call me his boyfriend. We haven't defined anything yet. And honestly, we haven't even really gone on a whole lot of dates. We're just spending every moment of every weekend together. We're hooking up a lot. We're going out to eat a lot, but our conversations aren't really happening in the way that intentional dating does. There's not a slow, steady build. There's not a sustainable pace to this. And that would come to slap me across the face when a few weeks later he said, look, I don't think we're looking for the same thing here. I'm not looking for anything serious. We're not in a relationship. Like, if you're cool with that, we can keep doing what we're doing. And I'm like, what? I met your family. You met my dad. Like, to me, that's pretty serious. I mean, we're spending days nonstop, a week together. Your friends have started calling me your boyfriend. So I'm not sure why you would think that this is not serious in any way or that we're not dating. So he breaks up with me. Now, what complicated things is, in the meantime, while we were dating, he had rented a part of his duplex that he owned to my father. And my dad, bless his heart, he started sharing details with me in the wake of the breakup about this person's comings and goings, and it wasn't good, and I had to establish a boundary there. But I very quickly discovered that Xander had moved on very easily and with little to no regard for my feelings. A few months later, when my father passed, I also went through some sticky situations with this person as I'm packing up my dad's things, and it was just very messy, and a lot of it was very disrespectful and very, very hurtful. And this was the third and final straw, really, in the string of these relationships that broke me in some form. By this time, I was already coaching people around the world, and I wasn't taking my own advice. And as you can imagine, I beat myself up terribly for that. You know, I felt this cognitive dissonance of, who am I? You know, I'm helping all of these people to have healthier relationships and improve their lives and get engaged and married and all these things. And I'm hearing constantly, like, Chris, you're a godsend. I don't know what my life would look like without you. Like, getting such positive feedback. And then I can't integrate that in my own life. And of course, the fallout from this relationship with Xander affected my ability to hold space for my clients. I lost a few clients as a result. You know, it was a pretty dark time in my life. But in the spirit of being transparent and honest with everyone, I want you to know I am human too. I make mistakes, and it's always how we treat ourselves, how we approach ourselves in the wake of our mistakes, when we're at our lowest, when we've repeated a pattern that defines us and determines our level of security. At the time, of course, I was beating myself up tremendously. I felt guilt, I felt shame, I felt embarrassment. And all of this I was dealing with privately. I mean, it bled over into my work, and my clients knew I wasn't my full, true self at the time. But all of this is to say, this helped me to better integrate and deepen my healing, because the gentleness that emerged in the months that followed, and the way I nursed myself back to security and healed from that relationship, has come to define this era of my life. I no longer date in that way. I also see at the time how not being socially connected, how not being emotionally diversified, as I've talked about on the show previously, led to me becoming codependent with and anxiously attached to Xander. And the clarity that emerged from this experience is something I still hold deeply and take very seriously for myself. Not to beat myself up, but to remember I need to practice what I preach. And I'm proud to say I do now. I'm not perfect, of course. I still make mistakes, but I don't slip up to the extent that I did with Xander. And part of why I don't is because I went through that experience. So I'm not upset about it. It didn't define me. None of these men define me. They each provided a piece of the puzzle that I now see. And that is a beautiful gift that I have received from these three men. So I'm not upset with Xander. I'm not upset with Aaron. I'm not upset with Brian. I wish them absolutely nothing but the best, truly, from the bottom of my heart. I want them to be happy. I want them to be fulfilled because I want that for myself. And I recognize the misalignment that was very clearly showing itself and how I wasn't showing up as my full self or authentically. And that's the biggest takeaway out of all of this. Whew. Those are the three relationships that broke me. They broke me open. They cracked open my heart so it could repair and become even stronger, even more beautiful. And I hope that something I've shared today has touched you. And if it did, I would really appreciate it if you could rate and review the podcast on whatever platform you're listening to it on, be it Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever else. Leave a comment on Spotify. My inbox is always open, and you can email me at crackliff.com. CrackLiffe.com. See you next time.